The case of Will Ravengard is always so conflicting for me because despite Larian's obvious shortcomings with this character, I'm consistently drawn to him and cheer for him, yet I find myself mourning what could have been. Because by all accounts, Will Ravengard is a modern day Prince Charming. He's a gentleman's gentleman, a hero's hero, and just downright a good noodle. He's sensitive in the right way. He tries to care about the people around him and take action that can help those that he sees suffering. And he continues to be kind and down to earth despite his noble upbringing. And several times in his life, when faced with difficult decisions, he's opted to put himself on the front line and take the brunt of all of the harm and punishment on behalf of those who would have suffered from it. And all of that is great on paper, but when you play the game, you realize that Will Ravengard's story isn't really his own. Because Will's story lies in the middle of a game of tug and war between his infernal slave master Mazora and overcoming his daddy issues via Duke Ravengard. And whilst I understand that that narrative conflict is a parallel to how Will became a warlock in the first place, he was raised by one of the strongest and most impactful figures in the Flaming Fist, Duke Older Ravengard. You know, him having those teachings instilled in him to defend Baldur's Gate at any cost while trying to stop this cult of Tiamat and having to rely on demonic powers to do it. I get it. But that conflict is never really expanded upon or touched with Will's character, and he ends up lacking depth and agency because of it. Most of the time, he just feels like a dog being led in one direction by one master or another. So rather than feeling like this, it comes across more like this. This is the moment Mazora yanks him around like some kind of animal. She literally says it. And I'm not sure if this is intentional. I mean, one of the lead writers on the game even realized that Will's whole arc was unfulfilling. And they attribute this to his story being stuck between two plot points. And even though we were all aware of it, it just sucks to hear it confirmed. All of that being said, I want to give a huge shout out to Theo Solomon. He's the voice actor for Will, and I think he did a fantastic job bringing life to this character. He really did most of the heavy lifting with this character. He was able to convey Will's charisma, his nobility, his pride, his care. All of that is great, and I hope Theo Solomon stays employed in the video game industry for years and years to come.
Damnable roach! Provoke the blade and suffer its sting.
Today we're talking about none other than Sheva Alomar from Resident Evil 5. We're all already aware of how much of a badass Sheva is in RE5, but this shit for her runs deep. Her backstory is pretty tragic, and I don't think we talk about it enough. So Sheva was born in 1986 in one of the Western African countries that speak French. It's never specified, but it's one of these. Now, according to the Resident Evil universe, rural communities around this area of Africa were oftentimes destitute and suffered from poverty, except Umbrella Plant Number 57. And the creation of Plant 57 led to the company town that Sheva and her family grew up in. And this company town had higher standards of living, better education, better housing, better plumbing. But like most company towns in the real world, this ended horribly. Because in 1994, Umbrella did the Umbrella thing where they infect a random person with the T-virus to see what kind of data they can extrapolate from it in this environment, which essentially caused an entire outbreak. So as the outbreak spread among Sheva's hometown, things got exponentially worse. So the USS, the Umbrella Security Service, came in and killed everybody. They were strictly given the orders to execute everyone in the town, because not only would it solve the infection and the mutants and all the terrible stuff that comes from the T-virus, but it also silences witnesses if they execute everybody in town. And the only way Sheva survived this massacre as a kid was to hide. And then Umbrella did what Umbrella does best, and that's bullshit the masses. It went on news shows, radio shows, any kind of media to let people know that this was just an accident that happened at their plant, and one of the workers or a lot of the workers or all the workers died because of that accident, knowing dang well they are at fault here for the loss of human life. And when it came to Sheva, I think it was the next day or some days after that, she was discovered by her uncle, who was essentially just looting the village, trying to find any possessions he can of value. And because of the state of the company town, Sheva could not live here anymore, so she went off to live with her uncle and I think his 7 children. And this was kind of bad because Sheva had a certain standard of living her body was accustomed to, so when she had to go live into like the rural, impoverished areas of West Africa, she suffered from malnutrition, sickness, etc. And Umbrella refused to set up any kind of compensation, financial aid, anything like that for the victims of their experiment. And this caused like a deep-seated grudge for Umbrella from Sheva. So a couple of months later after that accident, Sheva ran away from her uncle's abode, just looking for her former home, trying to find some remnant of her previous way of life. But after 2 days or so, she collapses from running, only to be rescued, until she was rescued by some West African guerrillas that were just patrolling the savannah at the time. And apparently this time with the guerrillas would end up radicalizing her, because the guerrillas told her everything that happened with her company town, Umbrella, all of that. And over the next couple of years, while Sheva was living with the guerrillas, she learned firearms, she learned hand-to-hand combat, all types of weaponry and tactics. She was trained as a child soldier by West African guerrillas. Now, I don't know if I should talk to you guys about the RUF and the type of guerrilla movements that were happening in West Africa at the time, but you can do a Google search and you can come to your own conclusion about the type of shit Sheva was raised around. But what I can tell you is that you do not want to mess with this woman. I think around in like 2001, Sheva got the attention from like international intelligence agencies or like spies or something like that. Because they saw her be this loyal child soldier for these guerrillas, I guess those intelligence agencies felt sorry for her and let her know about a deal going on between Umbrella and those exact same guerrillas that raised her, because those guerrillas may have lost their morals or their way in terms of like liberating things in exchange for power and the ability to dominate. And after hearing about that with Sheva's own personal grudge against Umbrella and what they did to their town, Sheva decided to work with the spies or the agents to essentially mess up the deal and have the police come in, raid, arrest the guerrillas, arrest the Umbrella people. The weird thing about this deal is that the Umbrella businessmen, the broker, whoever was offering the bioweapons, just vanished completely. So only Sheva and some of the guerrillas were captured. I'm not sure if it was like 2 days, 5 days, but sometime afterwards, Sheva and the guerrillas were freed. You know, just they were allowed free safety leaving the country, given US passports, all that stuff. But Sheva was adopted by an American spy who would become her legal guardian for the rest of her childhood. And under his guardianship, Sheva mastered the English language in about 6 months. She advanced in her education, going to top of the class, excelling amongst some of the most esteemed and prestigiously intellectual peers that you could imagine. Then she went to college. And then after she graduated, she enlisted in the BSAA, which is the Bioterrorism Security and Assessment Alliance. You know, the good guy team. Now, as she was training for the BSAA, a lot of her past was kept secret because they didn't want that affecting her standing or her application. But talks of her being a survivor of a bioterrorist incident were prevalent. That being said, Sheva passed her BSAA training with flying colors, excelling in marksmanship and her martial arts. Once again, this woman was raised by West African guerrillas. I'm not sure there isn't something she can't take down. And then she was assigned to the West African branch of the BSAA under the leadership of handsome man Captain Josh Stone. And that pretty much covers Sheva's backstory up until the beginning of Resident Evil 5. And look, man, I'm gonna say it. Sheva is too cool for her to be locked up in whatever vault Capcom is keeping her, Claire, Jill, and the rest of the RE characters. The streets crave more Sheva Alomar because she really is a fascinating character. But that day may never come, and even if it does, let's all make sure to give Karen Dyer her flowers for her amazing performance as Sheva in bringing this character to life and her contributions to Resident Evil and video games in general. Fingers crossed that Capcom brings you back, Karen, so you can give us another amazing time with Sheva.
I'm going with you. These are my people that are dying here. I can't just turn my back and walk away. We are partners. To the end.
And today we're going to be talking about one of my personal favorites, Echo, the boy who shattered time from League of Legends. Ever since his teaser trailer way back in Season 5 of League of Legends, Echo has consistently been my favorite tinkerer in fiction, my favorite engineer, and just my favorite brilliant badass. Born in the slums of Zaun, Echo was brought into this world by his parents Ina and Wyeth. And since his birth, his parents have been working tirelessly to get him out of Zaun. Because they understood how brilliant their child was, they would watch him tinker and mess with toys and trinkets he got from junkyards and scraps around Zaun. You see, they didn't believe that Echo could reach his full potential just by sticking to the slums in Zaun. They saw exactly how intelligent their son was and what he was capable of. So they did everything they could to invest in the future where he can attend one of the academies in Piltover. Mind you, Ina and Wyeth worked in the factories of Zaun. Between the toxic fumes they were inhaling while working in these factories, as well as the insane hours they had to work just to make ends meet. And Echo's parents tended to look a lot older than they really were because of those harsh work conditions. When it came to their son, they would take any chance they can to ensure that Echo prospers in Piltover or anywhere else that isn't Zaun. But Echo didn't really think like them because Echo has always loved Zaun. Despite the city constantly having to deal with exploitation by the greedy factory owners or the Piltover elites who would try to chip in and extort business and exploit businesses, Echo found a reason to love this city. Because when it comes to this city, Echo doesn't see slums. He sees potential. He sees a community that continues to flourish when any other type of people would have perished in this exact same situation. And he has a true admiration for the sheer energy and potential every single Zaunite has to make their condition better. And that serves as his motivation for wanting the place to be better so other people can be happy too. While his parents would be at work in the factories, Echo would just be kicking it on the streets with fellow children of Zaun. The children of Zaun are essentially a bunch of orphans or runaways with a sense of curiosity, or just some people who wanted to be outside. And rather than getting a formal education, children of Zaun would learn from the world. They'd be out on the streets, genuinely experiencing true freedom and learn everything that they need to about people and how to operate just from moving about in Zaun and dealing through its back alleys, talking to people, merchants, really just being one with their community. The good and the bad. Now, his lore is kind of tricky because Riot did a huge lore rewrite way back when, and they haven't even updated Echo's character model. They really need to let him keep the dreads in his base model because what the fuck is this mohawk? But now his origin story and everything revolving around his Z drive is a little bit different. But the thing that remains constant throughout each of the lore rewrites is that once Echo shatters time for the first time and completely understands how the time-space continuum works, he dedicates almost every second of his life to saving people. He has lost several friends and loved ones because of a single second. And he refuses to waste any more time while the people around him die to senseless violence.
Here's the thing about time. If you can't make the most out of any given moment, you don't deserve a single extra second.
We don't talk about Dohalim Ilkaris enough. Aside from him being one of the most handsome characters in the Tales of franchise, I genuinely love him and his story. You see, Dohalim is a Renin. And if you haven't played Tales of Arise before, a Renin is essentially like a space monarch. They're like royalty from a different planet, and most of them tend to be oppressive and sadistic slave masters. And most of them hail from this world called Lenegis, which is essentially a society that lives inside of a giant satellite. And in Lenegis, classism runs amok. But instead of finances, it's about magical power. The more magic power you have, the more revered you are, the more rich you are, the more influential you are. Now, Dohalim was a high-ranking member of House Ilkaris. But you see, Dohalim never really cared about that. Ruling was never his passion or his interest. His real love was music. And Dohalim and his friends would often slip away from their noble houses to come play performances in the local park. They would play and entertain the common folk. One day, Dohalim and his troupe were playing in the civilian park zone as they usually do, until they met a common woman named Faria, whose skills with the violin were said to be unmatched. So Dohalim invited her into the troupe, and Dohalim, Faria, and Dohalim's two other friends began to play beautiful music in the civilian park zone. They became such a close group that Faria became engaged to one of Dohalim's best friend and fellow member of the troupe, Tarnigan. But unfortunately, good times never last. Because of this barbaric ass event known as the Crown Contest, all of the nobles and royalties of the upper houses essentially have to compete and kill each other for a right to be titled Lord. Now, Dohalim never desired to be a lord, but because of his nobility, he was forced to fight. And the person he had to fight was his dear friend Tarnigan. And the only reason Tarnigan wanted to be a lord in the first place was so that he could bring Faria up to the highest ranks in Renan society, so she wouldn't be abused, harassed, and mistreated as a commoner anymore. And his love for Faria and his want for her to be lifted out of those conditions and recognized by the rest of Renan society caused him to fight using dirty tactics in his battle against Dohalim. And Dohalim was begging Tarnigan to stop, saying that he doesn't want to fight. Yet Tarnigan kept pushing, and Dohalim had to kill Tarnigan. After finding out that Dohalim, her best friend, ended up killing her fiancé, Faria swore that she would never forgive him. So after that event, Dohalim was crowned the Lord of Eldmensia. But once he arrived here, all of that pain and trauma from the situation on Lenegis, I'm talking about the classism, the discrimination, the violence, all of that was too much for Dohalim. Whenever he saw a Danan slave cry or heard their screams of agony, he would be reminded by just how traumatic that event was for him in his life. And because of that shame, because of that guilt, because of the pain that he had to endure at the hands of discrimination, despite him being a noble, he went ahead and abolished slavery and established equality between Danan and Renan races. And he continues to fight for that and fight for equality amongst all of the races. And I think that makes him pretty cool. But the rest of the lords, nah, these guys fucking suck. Welcome to 64-Bit Blackness, the show where I put a spotlight on some of our favorite black video game characters. And today we're going to be talking about Antea Duarte, the best banisher in the business. Born in Cuba, Antea Duarte was brought into this world by her mother, who was a renowned spiritual healer for Cuba. With that new freedom, Antea, her mother, and her sister traveled across the world, ending up in West Africa. And after years of her honing her spiritual prowess, she ended up in New England to become a banisher. Banishers are essentially colonial exorcists, teetering that line between the occult, religion, and Christianity, and being ambassadors of the spiritual realm. And she was the best of the best. In her early years of banishing, she would travel all around Europe, banishing ghouls, specters, ghosts, and all other kind of freaky things that go bump in the night single-handedly. You know, being this visibly powerful black woman in the 1700s had to have its toll on her, but there was still a kindness in her that was so unapologetic, a warmth to her that people could not deny. Her warmth was so warm, in fact, that it turned this Irish/Scottish war man, this front linesman, this battle-hardened person into a kinder person because of her affection and her kindness and her compassion in what she does. And a lot of the times that perceived coldness from Antea as she does her duties is really that same warmth, because she has to abide by these very specific codes and rules that she set for herself as a banisher so that the least amount of people can get hurt. Understanding that the dead must die, and if they are allowed to persist, only more people will be hurt. And it's because of that same compassion and her spiritual expertise that she was chosen to take on the biggest spectral plague yet, which is exorcising the evil force that is plaguing the colonies in New Eden. More specifically, bringing peace to the soul of a woman who was wrongly accused of witchcraft and murdered by her entire town. Once again, this is a game that takes place in 1700s America. Now, Antea is a dope character with a lot of lore behind her, but you're not going to be able to find any of it on the internet because the pages for it just don't exist. So if any of this stuff in this video interested you about this character, please go check out the game and take part of her and Red McCrae's story. Also, huge shout out to her voice actor, Amaka Okafor. Sorry if I mispronounced her name, I deeply apologize. But she did an amazing job at portraying Antea. Her calm demeanor, her impassivity, her rage, and just disappointment in the situation that is going on in New Eden. Fantastic character.
Peace on your soul. Remembrance on your...
Antea, wait.
Wait for what? We're banishers. Death to the dead.
Today we're going to be talking about one of the most handsome dudes in hell, Rodin, from the Bayonetta series. Now, Rodin used to be an angel. In fact, he was an angel of creation, and he had his own little sector in Paradiso that he ruled over. Well, he was, until he was exiled from heaven for fighting in an insurgency against Paradiso. I wonder who else was a part of this insurgency against heaven. After that little debacle, he spent several millennia in Inferno, which is what they call hell in the Bayonetta world. After he did his bid, he disappeared from Inferno and wound up in the human world, where he started a bar. And it's a really seedy bar, which are usually like the best but also the scariest, especially when the bartender is a fallen angel. I bet he makes a mean seventh heaven. But if there is one thing that Rodin is good at making, it's weapons. Rodin can make some freaking weapons, man. Even when he was in Paradiso, he was revered as a legendary smith. There are several stories and tales and legends of warriors who were severely outnumbered and used one of his weapons and came out on top. And all of those stories are true. To be honest, if he likes you, if you have a little bit of clout to your name, some popularity, he will give you a weapon. Now, the price for that weapon really depends on him, but he will make some cool shit for you. But if you're ever able to get into his bar via one of the hidden entrances that he has littered across the world, he'll sell you some things even money can't buy. And I mean that literally. He only does business with halos ripped straight from angels. And despite being able to craft such devastating artillery, he himself has never once used a weapon. He's only ever been known to use his fist. And I think that says enough about his true destructive capabilities.
They make a deal with the devil, and when they die, the devil gets his due. You get set down into hell and wandering around scared shitless for eternity. Kinda comes with the territory.
Why are you telling me this? Is this not why we are standing here, praying for her soul to rest in peace? I better not be out here catching a fucking cold if these prayers don't mean nothing.
It's nice to think your prayers are worth a damn, isn't it? You made a killing exploiting her. Hell, you never know. She might get lonely and come back to haunt your ass.